All right. All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Roxana Marachi. As Stephen mentioned, I teach at San Jose State. I'm a faculty associate professor there. And I will clarify, I'm not speaking today as a representative of my university. I'm speaking as a private citizen, a researcher, and a concerned member of the community about what I've seen with the privatization movement. My research initially has been on school climate and on violence prevention. Used to be looking at, student-to-student violence and what are the best violence prevention programs. As I see the privatization march forward, I see that there is a larger systemic issue of violence prevention that we need to pay attention to. And I see a kind of when we talk about bullying, it has to do with a power differential and repeated impact of harm. And I think that that's actually what's going on at a much larger kind of a macro scale. So I did not bring my forward. So the time I talk today is Pretendathon. The Pretendathon marches on. Computerized testing, charter schools, blended learning, and the textploitation. This is a new word I just came up with. Textploitation of children. Now, has anyone here heard of the Pretendathon? Anyone read Emily Talmadge's blog? Okay, so she has a great piece on the Baltimore County Public Schools. They had a $271 million one-to-one technology program. I think it's called the STAT Initiative, Students and Teachers Accessing Tomorrow. And one of the parents was very concerned about this, said that it seems like everyone's just kind of pretending that this thing is this great thing. And there's all these leaders coming in and flying in and saying this is so fabulous, and after only 9 weeks, look at the success that we've had. And actually I have a quote from the parent was concerned. She said, "We are touted as an international success 9 weeks after first through third graders in 10 pilot schools," which is about 6% of the schools, "received their laptops. We have school executives, principals, and teachers flying all over the place throughout the year, teaching and sharing their knowledge on our school successes with this digital initiative, which has yet to be proven. We have Pearson, Hewlett-Packard, officials from other countries and states traipsing through our schools." Only the updated and shiny ones, though. No, oh, thank you. Not yet. So, in any case, so she's saying that there's all this technology for a fanfare for something that's not actually happening. It feels like we are truly in the middle of one of the biggest school system shams ever in the history of the school system shams. Now, I'm here talking about the public school system sham. Oh my goodness. This is actually rooted in the technology that is now barreling through into our schools. The programs that are being legitimized to be put into our schools right now have been quote, tested in the charter schools at first. And so I have to say also, just go ahead, you can do one next slide. I am not against technology. I love technology. I'm a little bit addicted to it, frankly. And my mother teaches computer science, and it's absolutely necessary. We are going to be living in a technologically advanced world, and the kids do need to learn how to use it. But we're not going to get better drivers if we teach 4-year-olds how to drive than if we teach, 18. So I think we need to look at developmental concerns and everything too. So in any case, there's a pretendathon that happens when we pretend that something is working when it's actually not. There's also a pretendathon that happens when we ignore the harms that might be going on and something that might be problematic, and we pretend as though it's just fine. It's just fine. If anyone has had the experience of speaking to school boards about concerns, health concerns about children, and then it might, just like, okay, next, moving on, and there's not much, action or anything. That's something, it's what we see. Okay, we'll go to the next slide. How much time do I have left? 15 minutes. Okay, I'll go really quickly. So this is sort of what it looks like. You've got there's a fire raging, and it's like, yep, this is fine. This is fine. It's kind of representative. Okay, so you go to the next slide. We've seen this pretendathon happen in other situations. So in Flint, Michigan, for months, the citizens were coming and saying, look, the water is dirty. It's painful. We're getting sick. And the leaders were saying, no, hey, Flint, it's safe to wash. This is just don't let the kids drink the water. The yuck, right? And so I would like to just argue that a similar kind of thing is happening right now with a lot of what's being pitched to us and marketed as safe and good. So we can go to the next slide. So I'm going to try to draw some connections between the testing industry, the technology industry, and the charter privatization industry. So currently we have the statewide, quote, standardized tests. Unfortunately, they fail to meet the basic standards for use. In the same way that the water in Flint failed to meet basic standards for healthy consumption, they didn't do the tests that were necessary in order to let that water go out and be consumed. Our tests that are now being used have not gone through the appropriate psychometric validation measures or processes to assure that they're actually okay to use and that they actually measure what they're intended to measure. It is experimental. They'll say, oh, well, we're already in the full implementation, and so it's no longer experimental. It is still experimental. I put standardized in quotes because the children are not getting the test in the same format. Some children will have a computer with a mouse and a screen and a keyboard. Other children will have an iPad to do the same exact test. If you've ever tried to type a paragraph on an iPad, it's a very different experience. In any case, there's a lot of different technology. Acronym is the CASP and the SBAC. A lot of the scores are actually designed to fail 70% of students. The tests are highly correlated with SCS scores. This is a synopsis of a report that was written by a mathematician who analyzed the practice tests and found that there were egregious errors. Correct answers were marked incorrect. It was just a mess, and he's written this very clear, like over 30-page report saying that this is a problem. These tests should not be used. In February of this past year, over 100 education researchers, the California Alliance of Researchers for Education, Equity in Education, also signed a statement calling for a moratorium on the use of these tests. Number of states, almost half of the states that have belonged to the two testing consortia have dropped out in the past 5 years. So we go to the next slide. Again, this is just showing the cut scores are just set to fail majority of students. Now, what happens when the scores come out? It's the same thing that we heard in Michigan. Oh, don't panic. The water says everything's okay. Just don't be upset, right? The results may provoke shock, officials urge families to stay objective. This is in Connecticut. If you looked at the LA Times, you looked at the same media that came out. When the scores came out September 9th of last year, it was the same narrative. Don't be upset. This is just the scores are supposed to they're supposed to be lower. This is just a baseline year. Well, it's a baseline year on false data. It's still not going to be something that we can rely on to move forward. So moving forward. Now, I got interested in how are they trying to pitch this message that the tests are actually good. So on Twitter, if you follow the Smarter Balance hashtag, you see all of the foundations, the philanthropist, Gates-funded foundations that are pitching the message that these tests are really good. So there's on the Smarter Balance website, actually, they also have under the research and evaluation, it says that their independent external evaluations have confirmed that these tests are of high quality. So I went to one of those reports. This is done by the Fordham Institute. Happens to also be a charter authorizing agency in Ohio. Interesting. If you go back, actually, I'm going to go back to that other slide. So the lead author of this evaluation study that is claimed to be independent and external is also the same lead author of the Smarter Balanced field test, providing the clear path forward. This is the green lighting document that allowed the test to be given to 10 million children in 18 states in 2015. The report was written in 2014. You go to the author note at the end of this report, and you see the same lead author is the lead author of the widely used summary of 6 multi-state assessment consortia. She worked for ETS, the K-12 Center at ETS, to write marketing reports to market these tests. ETS has a $240 million contract with the state of California to administer the tests. And they're being claimed to be independent and external in this evaluation? Do you think that, let me just say this as a question. Do we think that that's independent or external? I'm learning how to speak with questions now. Okay, so we'll go to the next one. And again, what's really interesting, if you look at the board of directors for the Fordham Institute. There's an institute and there's a foundation. I think it's the board of directors of the institute. One of the names you'll see is a familiar name that we heard on the stage earlier, who is the CEO of the Magnolia Public Schools, the founding, CEO and former president of California Charter Schools Association and stuff. So you start to see these connections and networks, and it's really interesting. So we're going to go to the next slide. And so there's the testing. Now, when 70% of students fail or are designed to fail that test, what does it create? A disaster for sure. And if you've read Naomi's shock doctrine, disaster capitalism, it creates a mass market for privatization. Now you have parents who are upset and angry, and they need to make sure that they send their kid to a high-performing school. And if this is a low-performing, failing school, then they've got to now pull their child out and put them into a better school, right? It's really interesting to follow the media. So Rocket Ship is a school in San Jose, and when the test scores came out in the MERC, it was saying the Rocket Ship scores were really low, and they couldn't understand what was going on. And then just recently, there was the NPR article that said that high test scores, this is a high test score, network, and it just doesn't make sense how they're calculating it when one article calls it low, and another one, now they're just saying that they're in the top 5% of the state. It does not make sense, and I have a lot of questions about how they're calculating those scores. Okay, so moving, and actually just to go back to this one, online learning companies, this is a great article in 2011 talking about how the virtual learning industry has also pushed through a lot of privatization policies. Someone had mentioned ALEC earlier, the question about ALEC. They have written many of the laws that have allowed the charter schools and virtual online schools to proliferate. Okay, moving to the next one. Thank you. So what? So what's the problem, right, Roxana? Why are you so against technology? The kids need to know technology. It's not so bad. Technology is the future. We need to prepare our children for the future. So based on that logic, we've just got to put it everywhere, right? So let's see how that looks in the marketplace. Go to the next slide. Yeah, so we have the iPad bouncy seat. This is Fisher-Price, and it's out there. And there's a whole lot of other ones. There's like, I could tell stories. So there's all kinds of technology right now being marketed to very young children. And we don't know the long-term effects of this. Now, does anyone in the audience here think this is developmentally appropriate for an infant, a newborn, to be viewing an iPad? No, right? Does anyone here think that 2 hours of screen time for a 5-year-old whose vision has not fully developed, vision apparently fully develops around age 7, so 5-year-olds whose vision hasn't fully developed, to spend 2 hours every single day in front of a screen. Do you think that's developmentally appropriate? No? Okay, so a lot of concerned educators and developmental researchers and psychologists have gone to the school boards and said this is not developmentally appropriate, it's not educationally sound. And the argument that's made is that there's no research documenting the harm, so therefore it must be fun, must be safe. I call it Fisher-Price logic, okay? So if we don't have research to show that this is harmful, then it must be okay. And so now here's what it looks like in our schools. So you have rocket ships. If you go to the next slide, please. So in rocket ship, this is if you've heard of blended learning, you've heard of it because there's a school network in San Jose that has popularized this. Rocket ship schools, they have these computer labs and innovative software for the children to learn on, and they're mandated, they are required to spend quotas of time every day on this software. This concerns me. I have students in my classes, I teach educational psychology, I have students who have been substitute teachers at many of the rocket ship schools, I have some students who've gone on to teach there and, gone to teach other places and everything. And the things that I'm hearing, and because I'm so vocal, such a vocal critic of the school, people know me in the community, like, oh, you should talk to that professor because she's kind of studying these schools. And so I've had parents reach out to me, and I've had a teacher used to reach out to me as well, wrote a 5-page document about the health and safety concerns. So one of the things that one of my former students had mentioned was that the children, if they complain, they have a neck ache or a headache, or they want to take a break, they're tired, they're told, no, you get back on that technology, you need to get back on there. You need to finish your time. NPR did a study on them that was prompted by one of the blog posts that I had written, had some of the concerns, the health and safety concerns, and they had done an investigative story to see, are others, saying that this is the case. They interviewed about 14 people, former teachers and staff, and they also corroborated the same concerns that the children are not getting the breaks. In that piece, they documented that they were not getting bathroom breaks, and so a number of reports also corroborated by a physician and others who've been concerned about high rates of children with, wetting their pants or urinary tract infections. And so this is very concerning. It's almost like kind of a factory, for preparing them for the... Did you have a question?
I was just going to say, this would make teaching and parenting a lot easier, by the way. So advocating against it, why would I advocate against it? But I like easier, right?
You're doing the devil's advocate argument?
Yeah.
It's the babysitting, yeah, that's what a lot of tech apps say. This is the best babysitter ever, right? Oh, is it developmentally healthy? Is it actually good? So if they're saying high test scores, at what cost to the children's health, to the children's social development? Say again? Yeah, hey, right. So in any case, so this is very concerning to me. Now, as adults, and I think, let me see if I'm done. If we go to the next slide, it might have, this is some of the NPR piece. Basically, there recounted instances of inadequate supervision, bathroom accidents, even infections due to denial of restroom visits. They voiced concerns about a disciplinary measure a company calls Zone Zero. So several current and former staffers said this practice in effect amounted to hours of enforced silence. So some of the schools have silent lunch. They're not allowed to speak during lunch. Majority of the students are English language learners. They need to learn the language and speak. Also, the time in the labs, if you notice, it's solo screen time. They're not talking with their partner about how they solved the problem and what they noticed and what they didn't do. That might even be a good, activity. But it's solo screen time, clicking, and kind of a passive type. They call it active, but that's controversial. So, as I saw this, it reminded me back to the issue of violence prevention and systemic violence. You have the tech billionaires funding billions of dollars to ensure that young children, so it's not just disenfranchised, communities, it's their children, okay? The most voiceless are being mandated to basically do work, it's data entry, in order to send information or, get data for the software companies to then do fancy reports and analyses to then legitimize more software to be sold to other schools. So this is a huge industry. It's very, very lucrative. On the backs of kids. And so you go to the next slide here. And they may argue, but the kids are learning and they really like it and everything. And I'm not convinced by any of the research that says kids are learning. Actually, blended learning research shows the opposite. And I think developmentally and socially, we have a lot of unanswered questions. So systemic silencing, disenfranchising communities, despite pitching the choice and voice narrative. One other thing, majority of the students in rocket ships are of Latino and Hispanic background, and they are already at heightened risk of vision challenges. So they are at a 3 times higher risk of astigmatism and twice the risk of amblyopia. These are vision challenges. So why would we be putting 5-year-olds in front of computer screens for 2 hours a day? Now, it saves a lot of money. Right? So instead of hiring 35 teachers, they're going to hire 16 for the 600 kids. The way they do the rotation, it's kind of like a middle school rotation of children, for young children. And then for each campus, then they make a profit. for the nonprofit, of course. I believe one of the documents I read was estimated at about $500,000, I think, per campus for the savings that they have at the fewer number of teachers. The way that I don't know, just big picture to me, the Industrial Revolution was built on child labor, and it makes me question, I wonder if maybe some part of the technological revolution might be doing the same, but in socially sanctioned ways. OSHA has workplace protections for adults, right? Why don't we have something for children? Why are there no protections for children? So let's go to the next slide. I have a lot more, so I'm going to go quickly through these. Again, what's the concern? What's the big deal? Technology, it's the greatest thing ever, right? Well, there is a lot of concern. Daily, there are research reports coming out about the impacts of screen time, and also a new area of research I only learned about 6 or 7 months ago was the impact of wireless radiation. So the wireless devices, the iPads that schools are now getting, the low-income schools are getting the one-to-one devices, right? I think just a few months ago, a report came out about brain cancer being one of the leading cancer-related cause of death among young adults and adolescents, and at increasing rates. So in any case, the wireless radiation, there's a lot of research to show the concerns about not just the thermal effects, but also non-thermal effects. And we're really just learning about this, but there's no safety documentation of, turn off, make sure not to sleep with an iPad under your pillow, kind of things like that. But this this website up here, bit.ly/screen_time, has a collection of research studies, and apparently last spring, over 220 scientists, wireless radiation EMF scientists, wrote a petition to the World Health Organization to advocate for safer standards. Interestingly, the Professor Moskowitz, who is illustrated here, he's in our audience today, so just wanted to give a shout out. He's one of my heroes. And there was a Wireless Technology and Public Health Summit. If you were to scroll down this page, we're on the actual page, you would see dozens of articles. The Bio-Initiative Report 2012 has thousands of studies that have also shown this concern about the risks of radiation. Not going to go into that in detail, but there's still a lot of unanswered questions. So tech ethicists are also speaking out. This is a great article that just was posted 3 or 4 days ago from the Google's design ethicist, and he's even admitting, look, technology hijacks your mind. What you're seeing is going to impact the way you think. And we don't know at all yet the impacts of this early technology on the children's thinking. It's a fascinating article. I loved it because there's a whole lot of psychology in it. Okay, go to the next slide. And so does blended learning, does it work? Is there any evidence for it? The studies I've seen for the most part have been showing that there are no benefits. It's poor performance. The computers in the schools are not working. And still, enrollment growth continues because of great advertising campaigns and corporate lobbying, favorable legislation, et cetera. Again, despite the evidence of poor performance. National Education Policy Center has some great reports. Go to the next slide. It's interesting, I was trying to do research to find if there's anything positive, like what's out there on blended learning. And I did a Google search, I think, for blended learning reports and research, and it came up to this website, but where the Philanthropy Roundtable has a multi-part report, detailed PDFs, you can download the whole thing, and it's all on blended learning. And I wondered, okay, well, what are they saying? They had one of the last reports was basically saying, here's the way you can push blended learning. You should sell it. You should go and make sure that you're getting this in the schools. But then there was one that had an entire report that was on the barriers. What are the barriers to blended learning? So I thought, okay, well, they're kind of honest about this part. The bottleneck, a lack of research. There's little solid data published in peer-reviewed journals. Honestly, it's early on. No one knows what works and what doesn't, says Diane Tavner. She's the head of Summit Public Schools. Indeed, Scott Benson, who directs Blended Learning, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, part of me is really nervous that the dialogue and enthusiasm is outpacing the results. Again, reminds me of the Pretendathon. So, going to the next one. Then I looked, oh look, the Philanthropy Roundtable. It looks like they have a summit coming up the week before the MPE conference.
A year before.
MPE is 2017.
Oh, 2017, sorry. I was looking to see, do they coincide? So this is coming up in about a month and a half, and the K-12 philanthropy, now I thought, wow, this looks interesting. Let's go and see who's involved in pushing blended learning. Let's go to the next slide. These are some of the speakers. Program officer from the Bechtel Junior Foundation and Next Generation Learning Challenges, and CEO, the Charter School Growth Fund, the Innovative Public Schools. By the way, Innovate Public Schools is not pushing for public schools. It's kind of like Go Public. They're pushing charters. Charter Board Partners, Laura John Arnold Foundation, right? Zuckerberg, John Arnold, that was like Enron, I believe. Let's see, National Alliance for Public Charter Schools, we got Zuckerberg, Walton Family Foundation, Summit, Silicon School. So you can see the roots of the charter and privatization industry very strongly pushing blended learning. And then they are the ones who wrote that very extensive report. And then going to the next slide, I think. Yeah, so that's it. I mean, I could have gone much more in detail in terms of the screen time concerns and everything. But I wanted to sort of give more of the big picture of how the testing, the tech, and the privatization are connected, and they I think all work in tandem. I do have a collection of articles on charter schools and the concerns. I use this as a kind of a community education tool. It's chart_look. It's bit.ly/chart_look. There's a keyword search feature, so if you look at the little funnel-shaped icon and you type in KIP or, ALEC, someone had an ALEC question, it'll show up all the articles. It'll just pull those articles related to those pieces. I've been collecting this for the past, I think, 3 or 4 years, over 150 articles on it. These are the things we have not talked about today. I wish we had more time. We don't. But security, privacy, data mining, health impacts, school climate impacts, and again, the accountability pressures. When we have this test score ranking system to try to say who are the top schools and what are the top schools and what are the lowest performing schools, you create this Hunger Games dynamic where there's always going to be low performing schools. The state superintendent was under pressure early January of last year to publish the lowest performing schools so that then they could be, targeted and marked as, failing, and then convince those parents around that we need to close the school and open it up as a charter. The new LCFF funding, by the way, makes it more lucrative for the privatizers to target low-income communities as well, because they're going to get more money per student. And so this is all very connected. Now, accountability pressures and the hypocrisy of the equity narrative, I just want you to pay attention to this. So much of these reforms are done with this equity lens and trying to say this is a social justice, civil rights thing, right? And so when we push those accountability pressures, so I'm just going to go all the way back to the beginning of my talk about the percent fund. So we push those heavy accountability pressures. What do we see at the end? Is that the last slide? No, there's this, okay. So I've been concerned again about motivation, and school climate, and violence prevention, and it intersects with the exclusionary disciplinary thing. This is a longitudinal study that was showing, this was for NCLB, so it was from earlier data, not the computerized test, but still in terms of the accountability pressure, it had the unintended effect of increasing the number of student misbehaviors, such as suspensions, fights, and offenses reportable to law enforcement. Further, this negative response is most pronounced among minorities and low-performing students who are the most likely to be left behind. So in our efforts to try to improve things, we can inadvertently end up making things worse. I just hope that you all stay connected. I do have a blog. It's eduresearcher.com, and I have a number of updates there, and I'll put the latest one there in the next couple of days to the great news about the NAACP moratorium request. So, any questions, or I'm totally out of time, right?
One question. Yeah.
Okay.